Somewhere in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, there is a woman in her late 70s who has never taken a prescription medication in her life. She gardens in the morning. She walks 2 miles before breakfast. Her joints don't ache. Her mind is sharp. Her doctor, the one she visits once a year as a formality, keeps asking her what she's doing differently. She doesn't have a complicated answer. She has a root cellar. And in that root cellar, sitting in crocks that belonged to her grandmother, are 13 foods that the rest of the world forgot about somewhere between the invention of the microwave and the rise of the $80 probiotic supplement. Here is what nobody told you about those supplements. The ones in the sleek bottles with the clinical fonts and the impressive colony-forming unit counts printed on the label. Most of them are dead before you swallow them. The Amish figured that out generations ago, not from a research paper, from watching what happened to the people who stopped making food the old way. They never stopped. And now, peer-reviewed, university-funded, double-blind science is catching up to what a Pennsylvania farmwoman has known her entire life. This video is about those 13 foods, but it is also about something bigger than food. It is about the quiet difference between a body that is merely surviving after 60 and a body that is genuinely, stubbornly alive. Stay with me, because what's coming at number 5 changed how researchers think about the aging gut entirely. And when we reach number 1, the food sitting in the back of your refrigerator that you have probably been throwing away for years, I need you to be watching.
Before we get into the list, I want to give you something. We put together a free guide called How to Treat 30 Common Conditions Naturally, without prescriptions, without side effects, and without your doctor's permission. Conditions like high blood pressure, chronic inflammation, poor sleep, joint pain, digestive problems, all covered with practical, evidence-backed natural approaches, many of them rooted in the same traditions we're covering today. It costs nothing. It is yours completely free. All you have to do is drop the words "please send" in the comments below, and we will get it to you. No email list. No sales pitch. Just the guide. Now, let's get into the list.
Before there were pharmacies, there were root cellars. Before there were pill organizers lined up like little soldiers on bathroom counters, there were crocks. Clay crocks packed tight with vegetables and salt and thyme. Kept cool in the dark, where the living chemistry of fermentation could do its slow, ancient, miraculous work. The Amish didn't invent fermented food. Nobody did. Every civilization that ever needed to survive a winter independently discovered the same truth, that certain foods, preserved in certain ways, didn't just keep people from starving. They kept people from getting sick. And then something happened. In 1864, Louis Pasteur demonstrated that heating food to a specific temperature killed the microorganisms responsible for spoilage. It was a genuine breakthrough. It saved lives in a world where contaminated water and food were killing thousands. But the industrial food system took that discovery far beyond what Pasteur intended. Pasteurization became the default for everything, not just milk, not just juice, sauerkraut, pickles, kimchi, vinegar. Foods that had been biologically alive and medicinally active for thousands of years were heat-treated into sterility, sealed into cans, and given a 3-year shelf life. The shelf life got longer. The food stayed safer in one narrow sense. And quietly, invisibly, the biological activity that had been feeding human gut microbiomes for millennia was eliminated entirely.
The Amish, by conviction and by theological commitment to living the way their grandparents lived, never made that trade. They kept the crocks. They kept the starters. They kept the living preparations passed from mother to daughter in ways that no laboratory has ever fully cataloged. And the health outcomes researchers have documented in traditionally observant Amish communities: lower rates of chronic inflammatory conditions, different metabolic markers, gut microbiome profiles that look measurably different from the surrounding American population are not explained by any single factor. But the fermented food is always there. Every study, every household, every meal.
Here is the principle that makes every item on this list make sense. The human gut contains approximately 38 trillion microbial cells. Those microbes produce vitamins, regulate immune responses, communicate with the brain through the vagus nerve, manage inflammation, and influence everything from mood to cardiovascular function to how quickly you age. After 60, the diversity of that microbial community naturally declines. Stress, medications, processed food, and reduced stomach acid all accelerate that decline. The result shows up as chronic bloating, weakened immunity, increasing inflammation, cognitive fog, and fatigue that sleep never fully fixes. What fermented foods do is replenish and diversify that microbial community in a way that no supplement has yet replicated. Not because supplements are fraudulent, because the food matrix, the fiber, the organic acids, the enzymes, the bioactive compounds surrounding the live cultures creates a delivery environment that isolated bacteria in a capsule cannot replicate. The Amish didn't know that mechanism. They knew the result. Their great-grandparents walked miles and lived to 90. That was evidence enough.
Number 13. Fermented whey, Amish dairy tradition. This one surprises people because it doesn't look like medicine. It looks like something left over after making cheese, which is exactly what it is, and exactly why it was never wasted. The whey strained from homemade Amish yogurt or kefir is the liquid fraction of live culture dairy. It contains lactoferrin, a protein with documented antimicrobial and immune-modulating properties. It contains immunoglobulins. It contains bioavailable magnesium and potassium in a form the body absorbs more readily than supplements. After 60, magnesium deficiency is endemic and massively underdiagnosed. It drives muscle cramps, disrupted sleep, heart arrhythmia, and anxiety. Whey from live culture dairy addresses this in a way that commercial whey protein powder, processed beyond the point where any of these properties survive, simply cannot replicate. Traditional Amish households mixed this whey into porridge, stirred it into dressings, used it to start the soaking of grains, or drank it straight as a morning tonic. The practice had a name in every culture that ever kept dairy animals. The modern food system just forgot to keep the tradition alive.
Number 12. Raw milk kefir. The Caucasian mountain communities who maintained kefir traditions for centuries were among the most documented long-lived populations in human history. When researchers visited those communities in the early 20th century to understand why, they consistently noted two things: daily kefir consumption and physical function in advanced old age that looked nothing like Western aging. Kefir made from real kefir grains, the cauliflower-shaped symbiotic colonies of bacteria and yeast, contains between 20 and 60 distinct probiotic strains. Commercial yogurt contains 2 to 7. This is not a marginal difference. It is a categorically different food. The fermentation predigests the lactose, making kefir accessible to many who cannot tolerate fresh milk. It colonizes the gut, meaning the strains establish residence rather than simply passing through. Studies confirm it reduces IBS symptoms, lowers inflammatory markers, and improves lactose tolerance over time with regular use. 1 cup daily. Real kefir is slightly carbonated, genuinely sour, and thin enough to drink. If it tastes like a smoothie, it isn't the real thing.
Number 11. Amish apple scrap vinegar. In Ruth chapter 2, Boaz invites Ruth to dip her bread in vinegar, a meal offering. In a culture where every food choice carried meaning, vinegar was ordinary enough to serve to an honored guest at the table. That detail is easy to miss, but it tells you something important about how these cultures ate. Traditional Amish households make apple cider vinegar from the peels and cores left after autumn apple processing, a zero-waste practice rooted in generations of stewardship. The result is raw, unfiltered, and alive with the mother, the visible colony of bacteria responsible for converting hard cider into acetic acid. Multiple controlled clinical trials have confirmed that 1 to 2 tablespoons of raw ACV before a high-carbohydrate meal reduces post-meal blood glucose spikes by 15 to 30%. The mechanism is documented. Acetic acid inhibits alpha-amylase, the enzyme that breaks starch into glucose, slowing carbohydrate absorption in a way that matters enormously for blood sugar regulation after 60. 1 tablespoon in 8 ounces of water, 15 minutes before meals. never undiluted. The acidity at full concentration damages tooth enamel and the esophageal lining over time. Diluted, it is among the most evidence-supported and least expensive interventions on this entire list.
Number 10. Lacto-fermented beets. Isaiah 40 verse 31 promises that those who wait shall renew their strength, shall run and not grow weary. Whatever the spiritual meaning of that passage, there is a physiological reality that fermented beetroot addresses in a direct, measurable way. Raw beets fermented in salted brine concentrate their betaline content, the red pigments with documented antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties, while dramatically enhancing the bioavailability of their dietary nitrates. The body converts those nitrates into nitric oxide, the molecule responsible for vasodilation, improved oxygen delivery to muscles, and cardiovascular endurance. Randomized controlled trials have shown genuine reductions in systolic blood pressure of 5 to 10 millimeters of mercury with regular beetroot consumption, a magnitude researchers describe as comparable to certain pharmaceutical interventions. Beetroot preparations are now restricted by some elite athletic regulatory bodies. That is an unusual form of confirmation about the potency of a vegetable. The preparation detail. Heat degrades both the betalanes and the active nitrates significantly. Raw beets, filtered water, non-iodized salt, 3 to 5 days at room temperature. The traditional method is not just the simplest approach, it is the medically superior one. 3 to 4 ounces of the fermented brine before meals or physical activity. Your urine will turn pink. That is the betalanes being processed. That is not a problem. That is the food working exactly as it should.
Number 9. Fermented garlic and raw honey. In Syriac, wisdom literature recognized across Catholic, Orthodox, and historical Christian traditions, it is written, "The Lord hath created medicines out of the earth, and he that is wise will not abhor them." Honey and garlic both appear throughout ancient sacred and medical texts with a frequency that isn't coincidental. They were not theoretical. They were used daily by people who needed them to work. And what happens when you ferment them together is where the real story begins. The enzymatic environment of raw honey transforms raw garlic over 4 to 8 weeks in ways that increase both the stability and bioavailability of allicin, garlic's primary active compound. Clinical research confirms garlic reduces the frequency of upper respiratory infections, lowers LDL cholesterol, reduces blood pressure, and demonstrates broad-spectrum antimicrobial activity against certain pathogens, including some antibiotic-resistant strains. The preparation requires 2 things most people get wrong. The garlic must be raw and freshly peeled, never jarred, never premixed. The honey must be raw and unfiltered, still containing live enzymes and pollen. Pasteurized honey will not ferment the same way. Submerge whole peeled cloves in raw honey in a clean jar, loosen the lid every few days to release pressure, and leave it for 4 to 8 weeks. 1 to 3 cloves daily, more at the onset of any illness. This is the kind of preparation that lived in every Amish household medicine chest before the world decided medicine comes in blister packs. It costs almost nothing to make, and the grandmothers who kept it were right about it before the research caught up. We're about to reach number 8. And this is the one I promised you at the start, the story from 1 Kings chapter 19 that has been read for 3,000 years as a story about faith. But when you read it through the lens of modern nutritional biochemistry, it stops looking like poetry and starts looking like a clinical protocol. The food in that story is the next one on this list. Stay with me.
Number 8. Long fermented sourdough. In 1 Kings chapter 19, the prophet Elijah collapses under a broom tree in the Negev desert. He has been running for his life. He has gone a day's journey into the wilderness alone. He lies down and asks to die. In physiological terms, he is in simultaneous starvation, dehydration, and acute psychological crisis. An angel appears, twice, and both times with unusual textual specificity, the kind of detail that stands out in a book that rarely wastes words. What is waiting for him is a cake baked on coals. Warm bread, water. He eats, he sleeps, he eats again. And the text records that he arose and traveled 40 days and 40 nights on the strength of that food. Theologians have spent centuries on the spiritual meaning of that passage, but here is something almost entirely overlooked. A body depleted of glycogen, electrolytes, and energy substrate needs two things above everything else: complex fermented grain carbohydrates and water. That is a precise physiological description of cellular restoration. And the bread Elijah ate, made the way grain was processed in the ancient Near East, was alive in a way our bread is not. Real sourdough, not the bakery version made with commercial yeast in 2 hours, is leavened exclusively by wild yeast and lactobacillus, fermented for a minimum of 12 hours and typically 24 to 48. During that long fermentation, the bacteria consume the sugars that would otherwise spike blood glucose. They break down phytic acid, the anti-nutrient in wheat that blocks absorption of zinc, iron, and magnesium. They partially digest the gluten proteins, making them structurally different and significantly more tolerable for the digestive system. Studies comparing long-fermented sourdough to conventional bread show meaningfully lower glycemic responses, better mineral absorption, and improved digestibility, even in people who normally react to wheat. Traditional Amish communities have maintained sourdough starters, fed daily, and passed between households for generations. The starter is treated as a living member of the household, because it is. The industrial loaf in a plastic bag with a 3-week shelf life shares a shape with bread. That is approximately where the resemblance ends. Whole grain flour, a maintained starter. 24 hours minimum. The fermentation is not a step in the recipe. The fermentation is the medicine.
Number 7. Fermented horseradish. This one almost no one talks about, and that silence is exactly why it belongs on this list. Traditional Amish horseradish preparations involve grating fresh horseradish root and fermenting it with raw apple cider vinegar, salt, and sometimes raw beet juice for 3 to 5 days. The fermentation concentrates the glucosinolates in the horseradish root, the same class of compounds found in fermented cabbage, while adding live lactobacillus cultures from the raw ACV. Glucosinolates convert in the gut into isothiocyanates, compounds with documented anti-inflammatory activity on the gut lining and active investigation in cancer research. Horseradish specifically contains sinigrin, which studies suggest has direct antibacterial properties against respiratory pathogens. The Amish tradition of using fermented horseradish as a treatment for sinus and chest congestion in winter captured this effect empirically long before the mechanism was understood. Grate fresh horseradish. Combine with raw ACV, a pinch of non-iodized salt, optional raw beet juice. Ferment loosely covered for 3 to 5 days. 1 teaspoon with meals. Small dose. Meaningful biological activity. The Amish kept this in every root cellar through winter. It cost nothing. It lasted the season.
Number 6. Raw aged cheese. The Book of Samuel records that David was brought aged cheese during a military campaign, not as a luxury, but as field provision. Hard-aged cheese in the ancient world was a preserved, concentrated, portable food for people who needed caloric density and biological stability over extended campaigns. What they preserved was alive. Aged raw milk cheeses, traditional Parmesan, raw cheddar, aged Gouda, Roquefort, contain active bacterial cultures that survive in the cheese matrix and reach the gut intact. The aging process produces short-chain fatty acids, particularly butyrate, that directly feed the colonocytes lining your colon. Butyrate is among the most studied protective compounds in gut health research, linked to colon cancer prevention, intestinal barrier integrity, and reduced systemic inflammation. Raw aged cheese is also one of the richest dietary sources of vitamin K2 in the -7 Malawian Quachus form, the most bioavailable variety, which directs calcium out of arteries and into bones. K2 deficiency has been implicated in arterial calcification, osteoporosis, and cardiovascular disease. 1 ounce of properly aged raw milk cheese addresses both simultaneously. 1 ounce. 2 at most. A condiment at the edge of the plate, not a centerpiece. The way Europeans ate it for centuries. The dose is modest. The impact, according to researchers studying K2 and cardiovascular health after 60, is real. We are about to reach number 5. This is the food I mentioned at the very beginning. The one that stopped the Stanford research team cold, not because they were studying fermented food, but because the results showed up in their data when they were studying something else entirely. When they published their findings, the mainstream conversation about fiber, gut health, and what the aging microbiome actually needs shifted in ways the nutrition world is still processing. Number 5 is next.
Number 5. Amish fermented vegetable medley. In 2021, researchers at Stanford set out to test something they believed they already knew the answer to. They were wrong. The Stanford study compared a high-fiber diet to a diet high in fermented foods over 10 weeks. The researchers expected fiber to drive microbiome diversity. The fermented food group showed significantly greater increases in gut microbiome diversity than the high-fiber group. They also showed decreases in 19 inflammatory proteins, including several linked to chronic disease and accelerated aging. The fiber group showed no such improvements. The researchers had expected fiber to win. It didn't. Traditional Amish fermented vegetable medleys, combinations of cabbage, carrots, turnips, radishes, green beans, and cauliflower fermented together in a single crock, deliver exactly this kind of microbial diversity in a single preparation. Each vegetable carries its own distinct lactobacillus community. Fermenting them together creates a multi-strain probiotic environment that no commercial supplement has replicated. The critical detail: every vegetable must be raw. The bacteria that drive the fermentation live on the vegetable skins. Washing aggressively or using heavily sprayed produce reduces the culture available to start the process. Salt, weight, and time do the rest. 2 to 4 tablespoons with every meal. The brine is as medicinally active as the vegetables. It should never be discarded.
Number 4. Fermented oat porridge, overnight soak method. This is the controversial one, because it directly challenges something the wellness world has been saying with great confidence for 20 years. Traditional Amish breakfast culture involves oats soaked in warm, slightly acidic water, whey, or a small amount of raw ACV for 12 to 24 hours before cooking. This is not a slow cooking technique. It is a fermentation technique. The soaking activates phytase enzymes in the oats that break down phytic acid, the anti-nutrient that binds to iron, zinc, calcium, and magnesium and prevents their absorption. Unsoaked oats, including instant oats, steel-cut oats cooked conventionally, old-fashioned rolled oats, all retain their full phytic acid content. You are eating the minerals. You may not be absorbing them. After 12 to 24 hours of soaking in an acidic medium, phytic acid content drops by 50 to 90%, depending on the grain. The oats become significantly more digestible. Their mineral content becomes bioavailable, and the lactic acid produced reduces their glycemic impact. This exact method appears in traditional Swiss Bircher muesli, Scandinavian gruel, and Scottish brose, wherever people ate oats as a staple and maintained the physical capacity for hard labor into old age. The Amish maintained it because their grandparents maintained it. The mechanism we now understand explains precisely why they were right to. The oatmeal the modern world eats, instant, microwaved, ready in 90 seconds, is not the same food. They share an ingredient. That is the entire extent of what they share.
Number 3. Amish bone broth with fermented brine finish. Proverbs 17 verse 22 says a merry heart does good like a medicine, but a broken spirit dries the bones. The Amish took bone health literally. And what they put in the pot has been made the same way for 2 centuries. The research is now explaining what the tradition always delivered. Traditional Amish bone broth is made from the bones of pasture-raised animals, simmered for 24 to 48 hours with raw apple cider vinegar added to the water. The acidic environment draws collagen, gelatin, glycin, proline, and minerals from the bone matrix in ways that shorter cooking times and neutral pH water cannot achieve. Glycin, the most abundant amino acid in gelatin, is among the most studied compounds in age-related connective tissue research. Studies confirm it supports joint cartilage integrity, sleep quality, and inflammatory regulation. The gut lining itself is replenished by glycin and glutamine from properly made bone broth, reducing intestinal permeability, the breakdown of the gut barrier that allows inflammatory compounds into the bloodstream, a process researchers now associate with chronic low-grade inflammation and accelerated aging. The Amish addition that most modern bone broth preparations miss entirely, finishing the broth with 2 to 3 tablespoons of live fermented vegetable brine, stirred in after cooling below 40 degrees Celsius. This adds live lactobacillus cultures to a nutrient-dense liquid without destroying them with heat. The combination of gut lining support from the gelatin and direct microbial replenishment from the brine creates a synergistic preparation that neither ingredient provides alone. This is medicine that costs almost nothing. It has been cooking in Amish kitchens since before the United States existed. And the science is only now catching up to what every Amish grandmother already knew. Numbers 2 and 1 are the most important foods on this list. And they're also the most misunderstood. Because the thing that makes both of them work is something that modern food production actively, deliberately, and permanently removes. When I tell you what it is, and I will, in the next few minutes, you will never look at the labels in your refrigerator the same way again.
Number 2. Raw, unpasteurized sauerkraut. Captain James Cook documented it in his journals. Chinese laborers building the Great Wall ate it 2,000 years ago. Roman legions carried it on campaigns across Europe. German sailors used it to prevent scurvy on Pacific Ocean crossings before citrus was ever formally credited with saving lives at sea. Every civilization that ever needed to keep people alive through a season of scarcity independently arrived at the same food. Salted, fermented, cabbage. Raw, unpasteurized sauerkraut produced through lactofermentation contains lactobacillus bacteria in counts that can reach into the billions per serving. It contains vitamin C, historically enough to prevent scurvy on months-long voyages. It contains vitamin K2. It contains glucosinolates with documented anti-inflammatory and anti-cancer activity in laboratory research. It contains organic acids that studies confirm directly reduce inflammation in the gut lining. The Stanford study found that a diet high in fermented foods increased microbiome diversity more effectively than even a high-fiber diet, a result that surprised researchers who had long assumed fiber was the primary driver. Here's the preparation detail that determines whether sauerkraut does anything at all for your health. The shelf-stable jar in the grocery store aisle has been pasteurized. The heat that makes it shelf-stable kills every single live culture it ever contained. You are eating acidified cabbage. Nothing more. What you want is in the refrigerated section, or better in your own mason jar. Pack shredded cabbage tightly with 1 to 2 teaspoons of non-iodized salt per pound. Press it until the brine rises above the vegetable. Cover loosely. Keep it at room temperature for 5 to 7 days. When it smells sour and bubbles slightly when you open it, it is alive. 2 to 4 tablespoons with meals daily. Never throw away the brine. The German sailors who survived those Pacific crossings didn't know about lactobacillus. They didn't need to. They had barrel after barrel of evidence that the men who ate it lived. The research is now explaining why.
Number 1. Raw lacto-fermented pickles. I told you at the beginning that most people watching this have had this food in their kitchen at some point in their lives. That they used it as a condiment. That they ignored it. That they threw it away when they moved. That they never knew it was doing anything. Here it is. The lacto-fermented pickle, a cucumber preserved in salted brine through natural lactobacillus fermentation, is perhaps the most ancient prepared food in human history. It appears in virtually every culture that ever existed, under different names, with different spices, with different vegetables, but with the same fundamental mechanism: salt, water, time, and the intelligence of the microbial world. The distinction that determines whether this food does anything for your health is one question. Was vinegar added, or did the acidity develop through live fermentation? Virtually every pickle in a standard grocery store aisle uses distilled white vinegar. It is not a fermented food. It is an acidified food. No bacteria were involved. No bacteria survived. It is shelf-stable, predictable, and biologically inert. Real lacto-fermented pickles are made with cucumbers, filtered water, non-iodized salt, perhaps dill, and garlic. The salt creates an environment where lactobacillus bacteria, naturally present on the cucumber skin, thrive, produce lactic acid, and preserve the vegetable through genuine biological transformation. These pickles live in the refrigerator. They smell alive because they are. Studies show they increase the density and diversity of beneficial gut bacteria, contain meaningful amounts of vitamin C and B vitamins produced during fermentation, and deliver organic acids that shift the gut environment in favor of beneficial microorganisms. Research has confirmed that athletes consuming pickle brine experience rapid relief from muscle cramps, a phenomenon linked not to hydration, but to a neural reflex triggered by the acidic compounds. After 60, when muscle cramping often intensifies and electrolyte regulation becomes more demanding, this is not a trivial finding. Check the label on a jar in your refrigerator right now. If the first acidic ingredient listed is vinegar, it isn't what your body has been asking for. If the only acid present is lactic acid, produced by the bacteria themselves, that is the real thing. That is what your grandmother made. That is what the Amish have never stopped making.
There is one principle underneath every single food on this list. One thing they all share. One reason every one of them works. And one reason most of what fills the refrigerators of modern life does not. Here it is. Quality is not a preference. Quality is the medicine. Every active compound in every food we covered today is fragile in ways that industrial food processing does not respect and was never designed to respect. The live lactobacillus cultures in sauerkraut, the nattokinase in fermented soybeans, the glucuronic acid in kombucha, the live enzymes in raw honey, the allicin in fermented garlic, all of it is fragile. All of it dies in heat. All of it is neutralized by the processes that create shelf stability. Pasteurization destroys, completely and without exception, every live culture in any fermented food it touches. Refinement strips the active compounds from fermented grain preparations. Commercial stabilization processes extend shelf life by neutralizing the enzymatic activity that makes these foods medicinal in the first place. The difference between raw, unpasteurized sauerkraut and the shelf-stable canned version is not a small nutritional gap, like slightly more or slightly less fiber. One of those foods contains billions of live organisms performing complex biological work in your gut. The other shares a name with it. That is the entire extent of their resemblance. This principle, that processing at the scale of industrial food production destroys the very properties that made traditional food medicinal, is the answer to a question researchers have struggled to articulate for decades. Why do traditionally observant Amish communities show different health trajectories than the surrounding American population? Why do populations that maintain these food traditions across generations live differently than populations that abandon them? Not because the foods are exotic, not because they require expensive equipment or laboratory preparation. Because they are real. Because they have not been processed into stability at the cost of vitality. The people who built these traditions, who packed sauerkraut crocks through Pennsylvania winters, who maintained sourdough starters that outlived them, who kept fermented garlic in household medicine chests and gave it to their children at the onset of fever, had generations of careful observation behind every practice. They had bodies that told them what worked. And they built entire food cultures around those observations. Modern science, with its randomized controlled trials and mass spectrometry analysis, is now methodically explaining mechanisms that traditional cultures never needed to name. The wisdom was always there. It was waiting for the instruments to catch up. The question we are sitting with now is simple. At what point did we decide that food should last forever on a shelf? And what did we give up in exchange for that convenience? The Amish never made that trade. And the root cellar is still full.
One more thing before you go. That free guide I mentioned at the start, How to Treat 30 Common Conditions Naturally, without prescriptions, without side effects, and without your doctor's permission, is still waiting for you. If you missed it, just drop "Please send" in the comments. That is all it takes. We will get it to you. If this kind of knowledge matters to you, If you believe that the wisdom encoded in centuries of careful human observation deserves to be remembered, then you are exactly who this channel is built for. We are not here to sell you a supplement. We are not here to tell you what to fear. We are here because there is a generation of people over 60 who deserve to know that the tools for a longer, stronger, more vital life were never behind a pharmacy counter. They were in the root cellar. Hit like if any of these surprised you. Subscribe because we go deeper every single week. Leave a comment telling me which food you are already eating or which one you are going to make first. I read every single comment. The old ways are not gone. They are just waiting to be remembered.